Imagine being saved from the depths of despair by someone who promised to protect you, only to discover years later that everything you thought you knew was a lie. A twisted secret, a haunting truth, and a past that refuses to let go. In this heart-stopping journey, she must confront the darkness that once saved her, or risk losing herself forever. Will she break free from the chains that bind her? Or is she destined to be trapped in a nightmare of her own making? Stay with us till the end, and trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking twist that will leave you speechless. If this story hit you in the heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join our family for more intense, emotional journeys, and let's dive deep into stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support means everything. Don't miss out. Subscribe now. A young girl, no older than 6, lay curled up in a pile of trash. The stench was unbearable. Rotting food, broken glass, and crumpled paper littered the ground. She shivered in the cold, her tiny body bruised and dirty. The sounds of the city swirled around her, honking horns, distant shouting, the hum of passing cars. But none of it reached her. She was numb. Her eyes, wide with fear, stared at nothing in particular. She had no family, no home. Her only company was the trash. It was then that an elderly man appeared. His wrinkled hands, shaking slightly, reached down to her. "Are you all right, little one?" he asked in a soft voice. His voice, though weak, carried warmth, a contrast to the harsh world around them. The girl flinched at first, but his kindness was too much to ignore. With a surprising gentleness, he scooped her up, brushing the dirt from her skin. "Come with me," he murmured. The old man, despite his frailty, carried her to his modest home, a small, run-down building on the outskirts of town. There, he gave her food and a bed to sleep in. She slept soundly for the first time in what felt like forever. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The old man taught her how to read, how to write. He showed her the beauty of the world beyond the trash heap. He was patient with her, even when she didn't understand. Years passed, and the girl, now a young woman, blossomed under his care. She worked hard, learning everything she could. The old man watched her grow with pride, though his health was starting to fail. He knew his time was running out. But the girl, who had once been nothing but a lost child, was now becoming someone remarkable. She got a scholarship, then a job at a prestigious company. Her success was undeniable. And with every achievement, she thought of the man who had given her everything when no one else would. 25 years later, she stood at the gates of the old man's house once more. She was no longer the frightened girl in the trash heap. She had become a force, a success story that had stunned the world. But as she walked toward the front door, her heart began to race. Something felt off. The air seemed heavier, thick with an unspoken dread. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, calling his name. No response. The house was eerily quiet. She walked through the rooms, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. Finally, she reached his room. The old man lay in his bed, his chest still. Her breath caught in her throat. The man who had saved her life was gone. Her hands trembled as she placed a bouquet of flowers on his bedside table. A tear slipped down her cheek. The room felt colder now. A strange emptiness filled the space where he once stood. She had come to repay him, but there would be no words of gratitude exchanged. Only silence. And then, as she stood there, the world outside seemed to freeze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, the silence pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. The warmth of the flowers she had placed on the old man's bedside table felt distant, almost irrelevant, as though the love she had carried for him could never reach him now. Her mind spun in disbelief, unable to fully process the emptiness that surrounded her. The room was still, the air thick with an unsettling stillness, a stark contrast to the years of love and laughter that had once filled it. She had always known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. Her eyes moved around the room, settling on the small, tattered chair beside the window. The chair where the old man had spent countless hours watching the world outside, waiting for her return. Her breath caught in her throat. It seemed so unfair, so cruel that after everything, he was gone. She had promised herself she would repay him, make his final years as filled with love and joy as he had made hers, but now, he was beyond her reach. The thought of all the things she had meant to say, the plans she had held in her heart, suddenly felt suffocating. The world outside felt distant, as though nothing could touch her in this moment. Her hand reached toward the chair, her fingers trembling as she grasped the armrest, her knuckles white. She sat down slowly, her mind racing with thoughts of the life she had now, the life he had made possible. Had he known? Had he understood how much he meant to her, how deeply she had been shaped by his kindness? A wave of guilt crashed over her. Had she done enough for him? Had she been there enough in the end? Her gaze shifted to the small table by his bed, where his worn glasses lay, next to a half-filled mug of tea. She picked up the glasses, her fingers brushing the lenses as she held them to her chest. The room felt colder now, despite the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting shadows on the walls. Everything felt wrong, out of place. How could this have happened? How could he be gone when she had finally made it? She had promised him that she would return, that she would make him proud, and she had. But it didn't feel like enough. The door creaked behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. She stood up quickly, her heart racing, but there was no one there. Her breath quickened, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting from corner to corner, but everything seemed still, lifeless. Except for the faint sound of footsteps, echoing in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as though someone was walking through the house with purpose. But who? The old man's passing had left the house empty, devoid of the life it once held. She moved cautiously toward the door, her hand gripping the doorknob as her pulse quickened. The footsteps continued, now closer, their rhythm steady and unnerving. Her instinct screamed for her to leave, to turn around and run, but she couldn't. She had come this far. She had to know what was happening. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door, the creak of the hinges sounding louder than before. But when she stepped into the hallway, there was nothing. The house stood silent, as it had been before, untouched by the footsteps she had heard. A chill ran through her. Had she imagined it? Was it just the weight of grief playing tricks on her mind? But no. There was something more. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, her heart thumping in her chest. And there, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure. A shadow. Her breath caught in her throat. The figure was tall, hunched, almost as if it were waiting for her. But it wasn't the old man. This figure, shrouded in darkness, didn't belong here. Her body froze. The figure took a step forward, and then another. Her hands shook as she took a step back, her mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Who was this? What did they want? The figure's face was hidden, but its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. It felt as though the air around her had thickened, pressing in from all sides. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she struggled to breathe. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. The figure said nothing. Another step. And then another. It was closer now, much too close. The tension in the air was suffocating. Her heart raced as she tried to move, tried to escape, but her feet were frozen to the spot. The figure reached out, its hand long and bony, its fingers curled as if to grab her. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. And then, just as the hand was about to touch her, the figure stopped. Its head tilted slightly, as if confused, and for a moment, the air was still again. Her body trembled uncontrollably. The figure's head began to turn slowly, its face coming into the light. She gasped. The face, pale and twisted, was unmistakable. It was the old man. But it wasn't him. His eyes, once kind, now burned with an unsettling emptiness, devoid of the warmth and love she had once known. His face, once full of wrinkles, was now stretched and unfamiliar, almost as if it had been drained of all humanity. The figure reached toward her again, its hand now long and sharp. But then, as if by some unseen force, it stopped. The air shifted. The figure's presence faded into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Her heart still pounded in her chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. What had just happened? Had it been real? Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, gasping for air. She couldn't understand. None of this made sense. The room was still, eerily silent once more. And in the silence, the weight of everything, the loss, the guilt, the confusion, pressed down on her. She was alone. And yet she wasn't. Somewhere, deep within her, she felt his presence. The warmth of the old man, his love and sacrifice, would never leave her. No matter what had happened in this room, no matter the darkness that now lingered, she would carry him with her, forever. She sat there, her back pressed against the cold wooden floor, her legs sprawled out in front of her as the room seemed to spin. The air felt dense, as if the weight of the entire house had settled upon her chest, suffocating her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle, each exhale carrying the bitter taste of fear and confusion. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it real? Had the old man truly returned, or was it a trick of her grief-stricken mind? She closed her eyes, hoping for clarity, but when she opened them again, the house remained eerily still. The dim light filtering through the curtains cast long, jagged shadows across the room. It almost seemed like the shadows were alive, creeping and shifting as if they were trying to tell her something she couldn't understand. The silence was unbearable, and yet there was a strange presence in the air, as if something or someone was still watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the edge of the table, the surface cold against her skin. The flowers she had placed there only moments ago now seemed like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Her heart thudded in her chest as she slowly rose to her feet, each movement feeling heavier than the last. The floorboards creaked under her weight, but there was no sound of footsteps to accompany her own. The old man's footsteps, had they really been his? She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the unsettling thoughts. No, it had to have been her imagination. But why did it feel so real? She turned toward the door, her body stiff with apprehension. The hallway stretched out before her, long and dark, a labyrinth of shadows. The air felt colder now, a biting chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She reached for the door handle, her hand shaking as she touched the cold metal. The moment her fingers made contact, the house seemed to breathe, a deep, resonating groan filling the space around her. She froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out everything else. And then, as if in response to her fear, the air shifted again. The door slowly creaked open on its own. Her stomach twisted, nausea rising within her. The darkness beyond the door seemed to call to her, an emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. A movement. A shadow. She whipped her head around, but there was nothing there. Just the same oppressive silence, the same unsettling stillness. Her hands clenched into fists as she stepped forward, one foot in front of the other. She couldn't stay in that room any longer. She had to get out. Her body moved on its own, the fear pushing her forward even as her mind screamed at her to turn back. With each step, the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as if the very walls were closing in around her. She reached the top of the stairs, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The house was silent, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her just beyond her sight. Her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but the place was still, hauntingly so. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to take another step. And then, as her foot touched the first step of the stairs, a voice, soft but unmistakable, echoed through the house. "Do you really think you can leave?" Her blood ran cold. The voice was familiar. It was his voice, The old man's voice.
But how?
Her breath caught in her throat as she spun around, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Standing at the top of the stairs, silhouetted in the dim light, was a figure. At first, it seemed like just a shadow, but then, slowly, it began to take shape. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the figure before her. It was him, the old man. But he wasn't the frail, loving man who had raised her. No, this figure was something else entirely. His eyes glowed faintly, an eerie, unnatural light that sent a chill crawling up her spine. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, his once kind face twisted into something unrecognizable. The air around him seemed to warp, the temperature dropping with each passing second. She took a step back, her chest tight with panic. "Dubbage, what are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling. The old man didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, his movements jerky, unnatural. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as though the very space around her was being drained of its life. "I gave you everything," the old man's voice rasped, each word more distorted than the last. "I saved you when no one else would. And now you think you can leave?" His voice was no longer the warm, comforting tone she remembered. It was hollow, empty, like a broken echo. Her mind spun, trying to understand. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The old man's lips curled into a grotesque smile, his teeth too sharp, too white. "I want you to remember. I want you to remember the debt you owe me." His words hung in the air, thick with menace. "Debt?" she whispered, her mind reeling. "What debt?" The figure tilted his head. A twisted mockery of the way he used to look at her. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble, the walls closing in, the very house threatening to swallow her whole. "You don't remember?" he said, his voice growing more ominous, more hollow. "You think you've forgotten? You owe me everything." Her stomach churned as the realization hit her. The old man had never truly been the person she thought he was. He had been something more, something darker. The house seemed to shrink around her, the walls bending and warping in unnatural ways. She stumbled back, her mind spinning, but there was nowhere to run. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The figure reached out, its long fingers stretching toward her. And then, in a voice that wasn't his, deep, resonant, almost inhuman, he whispered, "I want you to stay." The room around her seemed to disappear, the walls folding in on themselves until there was nothing but darkness. Her heart stopped. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything went silent. The old man was gone. And in the silence, there was only her, alone. She collapsed to the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably. The house was still. And yet, she could feel it, his presence, lingering in the air, waiting, watching. She had not escaped. And now, the price of her freedom would be paid. Her body trembled as she sat there in the darkness, the weight of the silence suffocating her. Every breath she took felt like a struggle, each inhale sharp and shallow, as if the air around her was being drained away. The house was still, almost too still, but she could feel it, the unease, the lingering presence of something, someone, that was watching her every move. She wanted to move, to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if they were weighed down by the very memories that had led her here. Every time she tried to push herself up, her mind flashed back to the moments before. The voice, the figure, the twisted face that had once been her savior but had turned into something dark, something horrifying. Why? The question escaped her lips, the words barely more than a whisper. She could not understand. She could not understand how someone who had once been her protector, the man who had taken her in from the trash heap, could become this, something unnatural, something terrifying. Her heart raced as she slowly stood, her body still unsteady, like she was walking on a thin line between reality and something else, something otherworldly. The air felt thick, dense with dread, as if it were closing in on her from all sides. She glanced at the walls, their familiar creaks now feeling ominous, the floorboards beneath her feet groaning with every step she took. The house itself seemed to be shifting, distorting around her, as if it were alive. The shadows, long and twisted, seemed to move with a mind of their own, crawling up the walls and curling around her. Every corner, every doorway felt like it was hiding something, something that had always been there, just beyond her understanding. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt the temperature drop even more. It was cold now, bitterly so, and her breath came out in visible puffs. Her hand instinctively reached out to the wall for support, her fingers brushing the cold surface. But when she pulled her hand back, it was slick with something that wasn't there before. Something wet. Her breath hitched. The wall, the very house itself, was bleeding. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The house was not just haunted by memories, it was haunted by something far worse. She had always believed the old man had saved her, that his kindness had pulled her from the depths of despair, but now she wasn't so sure. Her legs shook as she moved down the hallway, each step slower, more deliberate. She was getting closer to the source of the darkness, to the place where everything had begun to change. The door at the end of the hallway beckoned her, its old, weathered wood now seeming even darker than before. She didn't want to open it, didn't want to face what was behind it, but some force, something she couldn't explain, pushed her forward. She reached for the handle, her hand trembling as she touched the cold metal. Before she could open the door, a voice echoed in her head, a voice that was not her own. "You were never meant to leave." The words were cold, harsh, and they sliced through her thoughts like a blade. Her heart skipped a beat, and she yanked her hand away from the handle, stumbling backward. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness in the room beyond the door seemed to pulse, alive and hungry. The shadows stretched out like fingers, pulling at her, calling her. With every fiber of her being, she wanted to run, but something inside her held her there, locked in place. The memories of the old man, the man who had saved her, the man who had loved her, clashed violently with the twisted figure that had now replaced him. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing inward. The air was suffocating, thick with a sense of impending doom. "Do you really think you can escape?" The voice rang out again, louder this time, echoing through her mind. It was him, his voice, but it wasn't. The words were twisted, warped by something dark and ancient. Her mind reeled, her heart racing, but still, her feet remained rooted to the spot. The door creaked open slowly, the sound of the hinges like a cry of agony. The darkness beyond the threshold seemed to reach out, as if it were inviting her into its depths. She had to go. She had to face it. Whatever it was, it had to be confronted. She couldn't live in this nightmare forever. With trembling hands, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold. The instant she did, the temperature dropped even further, the chill biting into her skin, making her bones ache. The room was dark, suffocatingly so, but she could still make out the faintest outlines of furniture she knew all too well. This was the room where he had raised her. This was the room where she had learned to love, to trust, to believe. And yet now it felt like a tomb. Her eyes scanned the room, and there, in the center, was the old man's chair, the one he had sat in every night, the one he had always turned to when he needed rest. But now it was empty, except for the dark stains spreading across the floor beneath it. Her heart froze in her chest. She moved toward the chair, her legs unsteady beneath her. The darkness seemed to swirl around her, pulling at her, trying to drag her back, but she forced herself to move forward. As she reached the chair, she bent down, her hand trembling as she touched the dark stain. Her fingers met something cold, something solid. A shard of glass. The pieces of the broken mug he had always kept beside him were scattered across the floor, the fragments glittering ominously in the low light. She picked up a piece, its sharp edges biting into her palm as she held it tightly. The air shifted again, and then she heard it. A low, guttural sound, like the breath of something ancient, something evil, coming from the corner of the room. She turned, her eyes widening as she saw him, his twisted form standing in the shadows. His eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, the color of something that had been dead for far too long. He was watching her, waiting. And then he spoke, his voice a rasping whisper that sent a chill down her spine. "You never should have left." Her heart pounded in her chest as the darkness around her seemed to come alive, swirling in unnatural patterns, twisting and bending like a living thing. The room felt like it was closing in on her, suffocating her. "You were mine. You still are." Her body shook as she realized the terrible truth. The old man had never truly saved her. He had always owned her, and now, he would never let her go. The darkness closed in, and in that final moment, the truth hit her harder than any fear she had ever known. She was never meant to be free. The words echoed in her mind, repeating over and over like a haunting lullaby, growing louder with each passing second. "You were mine. You still are." The weight of his voice crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. It felt as though the very air had been sucked out of the room, leaving her in an unbearable vacuum of emptiness. Her heart pounded violently in her chest, each beat a reminder of the fragile thread of life that hung between her and this twisted reality. She staggered back, her feet slipping on the cold, slick floor. Every step she took felt like it led her deeper into a nightmare. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she reached for the wall, the rough surface grounding her in the unbearable moment. But the shadows in the room seemed to crawl closer, reaching for her, pulling at her like cold fingers. Her vision blurred as tears welled up, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't. Not now. Not when she needed to be strong, not when she had to understand what was happening. The man, the twisted form of the person who had once been her savior, took another step forward, his movement slow and deliberate. The shadows seemed to dance around him, as if they were alive, moving with his every motion. The air grew colder, a biting chill that pierced her skin, made her bones ache with the weight of his presence. "You think you've escaped," he said, his voice low and rasping. "You think you can walk away from me, from what you owe me. But you can't. You were always mine from the moment I found you. And now you'll never leave." His words wrapped around her like chains, tightening with each syllable, binding her to him in a way that felt suffocating, like she was drowning in the depth of her own terror. She wanted to scream, to run, but every part of her felt paralyzed. The house, the room, felt like a prison, and she was its captive. There was no way out. There was no escape. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely leaving her lips, trembling with fear and confusion. She couldn't understand. She had loved him, trusted him, believed in him. How could he, this thing, be the same person? The figure before her didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head, the movement slow and deliberate, as though studying her, savoring her fear. And then the air shifted once more. The room seemed to stretch, the shadows growing longer, deeper, as if they were alive, pulsing with a life of their own. Her skin crawled as the temperature plummeted even further, until it felt like the very marrow in her bones had turned to ice. "Do you remember?" the figure asked, its voice now impossibly deep, a growl that vibrated through the floor, through her very core. "Do you remember what I saved you from?" She flinched, her mind struggling to piece together the fragmented memories, the jumbled images of the past. She had been a child, lost, abandoned, forsaken, until he had found her, cradled her in his arms, and promised to protect her. He had given her a home, a family. He had given her everything she needed, everything she had ever wanted. But now, standing before her, his figure twisted and grotesque, those memories felt wrong. They felt contaminated, as though they had been stained by something dark, something malevolent that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. He stepped closer, and the shadows clung to him, reaching for her like dark tendrils. She could feel them closing in, pulling her toward him, suffocating her. The room seemed to bend, the walls shifting in and out of focus, warping into something unrecognizable. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. Don't panic. Don't panic. The thought was like a mantra, but her mind was unraveling, spinning out of control. She gasped for air. I don't remember. I don't remember what you mean. The figure's eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, the intensity of his gaze burning through her. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and claw-like, and she felt her stomach lurch as they hovered inches from her face. This was it. This was the moment when everything she had known, everything she had believed, would be destroyed. Remember, he whispered, his voice like ice, cold and final. You owe me everything. You belong to me. You've always belonged to me. In that instant, the walls of the room seemed to collapse around her. The world around her shattered. The house, the shadows, the very fabric of reality itself cracking open like a broken mirror. She felt herself falling, tumbling through darkness, her body weightless, spinning through an endless void. But where was she falling? The ground beneath her feet disappeared, and she was suspended in an infinite nothingness, her body trembling uncontrollably. The air was thick, suffocating, and she could barely catch her breath as the darkness surrounded her, pressing in from all sides. The figure's presence was still there, looming over her, its voice reverberating in her mind, louder now, filling every corner of her thoughts. You can never escape me, the figure said, its voice a low, guttural growl. You were mine before you even knew it. A cold tear slipped down her cheek as she clutched her arms around herself, trying to hold on to something, anything, to keep her grounded, to keep her from slipping completely into the abyss. How had this happened? She had trusted him. She had loved him. She had believed in the kindness he had shown her, the care he had given. But all of it had been a lie, a mask, a facade. Her mind screamed as the weight of her realization settled over her, suffocating her even more than the darkness that pressed in on all sides. There was no escape. There never had been. Her hands shook as she reached out, as if searching for something to hold on to pull herself back from the abyss. But there was nothing. The emptiness stretched on forever, swallowing her whole. The figure's laugh echoed around her, low and menacing, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. I've waited so long, the figure said, its voice dripping with malice. And now, you're mine forever. The last vestiges of her strength evaporated, and she collapsed into the darkness, the weight of her surrender crashing down on her with the force of 1,000 storms. The terror that had been building inside her consumed her, drowning her in the cold, endless void. Her final thought before everything went dark was simple, clear, and crushing. She was never meant to be free. In the suffocating darkness, time seemed to stretch into infinity, the cold tendrils of despair gripping her every breath. She felt herself slipping away, lost in a world that no longer made sense. The figure loomed over her, its presence oppressive, its whispers like jagged shards of ice carving through her mind. For what felt like an eternity, she remained suspended in that void, her thoughts scattered, her spirit crushed beneath the weight of the revelation that she would never escape. She had been his from the beginning, had always been his, even if she hadn't known it. Every step of her life had been a carefully woven thread in a web she couldn't escape from. But then, a flicker of something, just the faintest spark, began to burn deep inside her. It wasn't the fire of fear anymore. It was something else. A memory. A feeling. Was it hope? She closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to hold on to that spark that had ignited in her chest. She thought of everything she had lost. She thought of the old man, of the love he had shown her, no matter how twisted it had become. But above all, she thought of the one thing that had kept her alive all those years, the will to live, the will to survive. She wasn't just a victim. She was stronger than this. With all the strength she had left, she clung to that thought. It was fragile, delicate, but it was enough. She wasn't going to be swallowed up by the darkness. She wasn't going to let him win. The figure, her twisted former savior, loomed closer, its grotesque form towering over her, its eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. But something had shifted. It didn't know it, but the very thing that had kept it alive, that had fueled its power, was slipping away. "I've been waiting for you," it growled, its voice a harsh rasp that shook the air around her. She met its gaze, her breath still ragged but steadying with each passing moment. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of the darkness. "I know," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. "But I'm done waiting." The world around her seemed to pulse with energy, the very air vibrating with her defiance. For the first time, the darkness wasn't suffocating her, it was shifting. Her mind cleared as she stood, the oppressive weight lifting off her chest, the cold fading from her skin. The shadows that had once clung to her now recoiled. The figure before her faltered, its eerie glow dimming, its form flickering as if it were losing its hold on reality. She could feel the change, like the tides of an ocean turning, pushing against the very thing that had kept her trapped for so long. "Do you really think you can stop me?" the figure hissed, its voice faltering for the first time. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she replied, the words like a declaration, a truth she had needed to say for so long. She raised her hands, her palms facing the creature, and in that moment, everything in the room seemed to shift. The walls, once dark and oppressive, began to dissolve into light. The shadows that had haunted her began to dissipate, drawn into the warmth that now radiated from her. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying ember, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot escape me. You owe me everything." But she shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes, not from fear, but from the relief that was finally flooding her. She had carried this burden for so long, had lived in the shadow of what he had done to her, but now she was free. "No," she whispered. "I don't owe you anything. I owe myself." The light around her intensified, filling the space with a warmth so pure, so bright, that it burned away the last remnants of darkness. The figure screamed, its form disintegrating into the very shadows that had once given it life. And then it was gone. The house, her prison, was now a place of peace. The oppressive darkness had lifted, leaving only the echoes of what had been. She stood there, alone, but not lonely. For the first time, she felt whole. The world outside the house was still waiting for her. The life she had built, the future she had worked for, was all still there, waiting for her to reclaim it. And though the road ahead would not be easy, she knew now that she was stronger than anything that could come her way. She smiled softly to herself as she stepped out into the daylight, the sun warming her face, a symbol of the new beginning that awaited her. She had survived. And she would thrive. As the camera zoomed out, showing her walking through the doors of the house she had once feared, the music swelled, an emotional, heartwarming melody that spoke of triumph over darkness, of the strength that lies in facing one's fears, no matter how terrifying they may seem. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers to shape now. And as she walked into the world, leaving behind the shadows that had defined her past, there was one last thought that lingered in the air. We all have a choice: to face our demons, or let them define us. If this journey touched your heart, if you felt the weight of the struggle and the power of overcoming it, please consider subscribing to our channel. Stay with us as we explore more stories of strength, survival, and triumph. Hit that subscribe button and join the community. Together, we'll keep finding the strength to overcome anything.